Right.
So I'm joined today with Dr. Alexander Batthyány from Vienna, and this is a real privilege for me. He has released his new book, Terminal Lucidity and the Border of Life and Death. And I think it's amazing that we're getting the opportunity to hear from you. You are the Director of Research Institute for Theoretical Psychology and Personalistic Studies at Pazmany Peter Catholic University in Budapest, professor of existential psychotherapy at the Moscow Institute of Psychoanalysis, and the director of Viktor Frankl Institute of Logotherapy in Vienna, and the author and editor of more than 15 books. And your academic work has been translated into many languages. And both myself and my daughter, who's studying philosophy, we were very interested in your work. And reason being, my mother used to mention how her grandmother died when we were young. This point of lucidity just before death, and when your book came out, she said, "I recognize this,"
Nice.
and I just thought, Professor, if you could just take us through how this book came to be published, a little bit your work, and maybe this discussion can be brought out more into the international English-speaking world on the
Right.
work that you've been doing.
So first of all, thank you for having me, and hello to viewers and listeners. It's very nice to be here with you. And anyway, so the word terminal lucidity is a very new addition in the dictionary. Yeah, it's a new term for something which has been observed since almost ever since humans took care of humans, and this is a very human feature. So with the beginning of mankind, if you want, yeah. And what it refers to is that from time to time, we don't know how often, people who have been severely cognitively impaired, had dementia or strokes or brain tumor, I mean, the whole variety of cognitively impairing brain disorders, and they've been written off mostly because we know that the dementias are irreversible. There's usually not usually, it's not in the textbook, a return, a remission doesn't occur, unfortunately. Yeah. And yet, what has been observed and still is being observed is that some of these people, at the very border of life and death, so when they are about to die, suddenly make a return. They come back, yeah, and they talk and they look at you. They look you in the eye. They know your name once again, and often they are beautiful last conversations and so on. Yeah, and this, once again, has been observed for a long time, but only in 2009. Just imagine how long it took us. In 2009, suddenly three papers were published in three scientific journals, one of being the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease, the Journal of Near-Death Studies, and one called Palliative Care and Support, whatever, I don't know the name. And they described such cases, mostly historical cases. And funnily enough, the last time this phenomenon was on the forefront of medical science was during the Victorian times.
Mhm.
And and also from the point of view of the history of ideas, to the Victorian doctors who still had an idea about the soul and so on. This was not so much a mystery as it is today, but a clear-cut evidence, so to speak, of something about us being not totally and identifiable with physical, with the brain and so on. Yeah. So there would be so much to say, but when I read these three papers, I knew that this is something we have to look at because it's so interesting on many different layers. On the one hand, let's not forget that right now millions of people are suffering from dementias, yeah, and millions of family members suffer with them, yeah, and the idea that there might be something like a remission is, of course, clinically highly relevant, yeah, but
Yes.
it goes even beyond that, yeah, namely, and there's just a clear question. I come, as you mentioned, from theory of psychology, and the contemporary, let's say, mainstream, it changes, but the mainstream picture of who we are is we ourselves and so on are basically a function or a product of brain processes. Yeah. Now, what is happening? And it is a question. I don't answer it, but it is a severe question. Yeah? What is happening? What can even happen? That somebody has a severely disordered brain. And if you look at the CT scan, like the brain images of someone with dementia, you see a picture of destruction. Yeah. And yet suddenly these people return.
Mhm.
And we do know that brain, neurons don't regrow so fast, and they don't regrow. And so, of course, there are many more implications, such as what is a self, yeah, and um, and in the book I tried to, what I will tell you. There were two versions of this book. The first version was very much an argument for dualism, yeah, and about the soul and about human dignity being that. The disorders can disturb us but can't destroy us, not what we have but who we are. Yeah. And the publisher gave it back to me and said, you know what, this is theoretical philosophy, highly metaphysics. We won't. And this is St. Martin's Press, which is Macmillan. It is US America's biggest publisher. And they said, we will never sell one copy of it. Yeah, they wanted to have something for the mass market. So it was a constant fight to smuggle in certain concepts. But of course, I mean, the implications are enormous. Yeah, on many
Yes.
different layers. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
anyway, and when these papers came out, I immediately ran to my students. Yeah, I was a professor already, and I write this in the book. At the end of the term, when the students are totally overwhelmed with what they have to learn, yeah, I usually try to make them familiar with the more subtle aspects of our field, cognitive science. And then I said, and so they don't have to learn this, but I hope they understand it, and they also understand the future place in science, because this next generation of dealing who we are and so on. And I talked about terminal lucidity, and on the spot, we had 15 students, and then we started to do a research group, still ongoing. Yeah.
Yes, that is quite amazing. Because in your book you have lots of examples of different stories about this phenomenon, which is quite fascinating. And could you imagine the amount of people that die alone, that don't have family around them, that especially even during the COVID time? I mean,
Yeah.
what could be happening that we're not observing at the moment of death? It's a profound question.
Yeah, yes, I'm almost, yeah. I mean, it's many. We don't know how many of such episodes we do miss, because usually they are very short. They could be 1 hour, 2 hours, yeah, 3 hours perhaps, but on average it's about 2 to 3 hours, yeah. And if
Yeah.
you look at a nursing home, how busy and overwhelmed people are, because so few people are taking care of people. I said earlier on, ever since humans took care of humans, but nowadays it's more the exception rather than the rule. Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's outsourced to hospitals and so on. And it's not a criticism on mankind. I mean, I totally understand why. Yeah. But I do hope, it's just a footnote to the study, but I do hope that perhaps we rediscover the beauty of care, and to use a very old-fashioned term, of mercy. Because if one takes care of people who are dying or people who are in dementia, they won't thank you. You won't get the
Yeah.
feedback, which usually, sometimes, if you're very externally motivated, we look for somebody telling us good, or pay you or whatever. Yeah. But and this is one reason why I put in these many stories. Okay, the publisher wanted it because it's more, yeah. But on another layer, there is a certain reward which is hidden when you commit a certain act. Yeah, you will not expect its beauty, and yet it will come. Yeah, but we
Yes.
have to get, and sometimes, and so many of these things also in this book happen between the lines. Yeah, and when we just are willing to give without expecting anything back. Yeah, and suddenly the reward comes either from the outside, or maybe from your own, from the inside, from your conscience, from your from your
Yeah.
real self, if you want, yeah. And this is why sometimes we have to look, yeah, at these darker places. I mean, maybe they're not that dark. I've been in the field of the psychology of death and dying for about 20 years now. And when I tell colleagues or friends, yeah, they put on a gray face and think it's very sad. But you know what? It's not. And if you go and if you talk to hospice workers or those who are working in this field, yeah, suddenly you discover that there's much more light in what others believe is darkness, and there's much more darkness in other what others believe are, you know, the everyday life is very harsh. We put on ourselves an extremely harsh social reality, and to even believe that this is the better world turns out to be a grave error once you look at who we really are. We are born, we are going to die, and there's a lot happening between these two events, yeah, and perhaps even after. But you know, it's a reversed world, if you want, yeah.
Yes, 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 and indeed, and you picked up on a very important point with the care of those with dementia or elderly, that we don't see a worth in them in our society, and this is why we have the push for euthanasia and the push for abortion. We don't see the worth in these human beings, and yet what we do to them, how does that change us? And you're talking caring for somebody with dementia. I mean, I go back, and again, this is why your book kind of had such a resonance with me, because I go back to what my mother spoke about. She was this was in the late 1940s. My mother remembers her grandmother dying at home. So she was bedridden for the last number of months. And her mother and her sisters and her family, they would have cared for this woman as she dies. And my mother remembers her moment of death, her opening up, her lucidity. And you know, that how we cared for them forms us how to care, and yet we're not teaching the world to our young generation to care for your child in the womb, or to care for your parent in an old parent's home. Sadly, so many people today, you know, you put them in an old person's home and you might visit them once a week or twice a week, but there's no day-to-day experience of cleaning them, helping them, supporting them. They're a disturbance for this world because we are completely materialistically focused.
Yeah.
And your book really is opening up a whole nother world where, you know, you're talking about stories here of people with profound dementia that all of a sudden return and are able to quote poetry and
Yeah.
talk about experiences. This is revelationary, that people
Yeah,
need to
yeah.
read this book.
It's a beautiful story, by the way. That it was an elderly couple of two poets, yeah, contemporary poets, and he developed dementia, yeah. And but on his last day, he was back, and they reminisce. You know, he quoted poetry to her, yeah, from the from the days when they were getting engaged and deeply in love, and you see the sunset and so on, and and. And he asked her, "Do you remember this?" And you know, the sweetness of this question is to be so you know, he's the dementia patient, yeah. Now suddenly
Yes.
remember all these things, yeah. And then the kindness to us, but do you remember? I mean, it's yeah. What you mentioned about euthanasia and abortion, I think it's a very important point because it so reflects back on us now. Yeah, there are these two doors, if you wish, to this earthly life. Yeah, being born and going to die. Yeah, and these have become such insecure, unsafe spaces. Not because of nature, but because of us. Yeah, it's us doing the work. Yeah, and the question: who do we let in, and who do we allow to stay?
Yes.
And of course, this makes the mindset this gives to us, those who are living and you know, still healthy and so on, yeah, it tells us you are here only on condition, yeah, namely that you continue to be functional. And okay, I mean, there's so many thoughts now, but I just wanted to 2 years ago, I was kindly and undeservedly invited to speak at the Vatican, at the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences. Yeah, and the question was that of the family, of the crisis of the family. And why do I mention this in this context? Because the family is the only space. And this was, so to speak, my contribution, tiny one compared to, anyway, but it's the only place where you don't have to earn your title. You are a father or a son or a daughter, no matter what you do. Yeah, and, you know, you can't lose the status if you want. Yeah, whereas every other position in society you have to earn. Yeah, so
Yes.
this tells us that it's worth, if not, if there are many more reasons, but tells us it's worthwhile protecting this. Yeah, but now comes the next step. Not only is the question whether you're recognized in society depend on what you do, but the question whether you're allowed to even exist, yeah, and how insecure, how awfully anxious must we be, yeah, if our allowance to merely exist depends on how functional we are, yeah, and where's the concept of mercy? And funnily enough, there was a Princeton psychologist back there, yeah, no, a philosopher, and he said to the academy, we're about 15, 20 people, yeah. Now, where have we ended in this time, yeah, that we need an Austrian psychologist telling us in the Vatican about the necessity of mercy, yeah. But I must say, by now, I teach at the Catholic University, but also at a very secular university in Vienna, what to speak of Moscow, that I think we shouldn't be shy of reintroducing the concept of mercy, yeah, because there's no substitute for it. It's not
Yeah.
only kindness, it means, I mean, the true would be causeless mercy. In other words, it's undeserved, yeah, and yet it's deeply deserved because it's woven into our dignity, which is us. Anyway, so the book tries to show that there might be, and I think there is, an inner life which might be hidden. But very importantly, and I also tell this to audience when I talk about this book or this work, yeah, even if not, yeah, even if it does not become visible, as soon as we see a human face, and Fichte, who was a German philosopher, idealist, he said, whenever we see something which closely resembles the human face, das menschliche Antlitz, yeah, and if it's only a sketch, yeah, it must be holy to us, yeah, because of image and likeness, but also because we know from ourselves that we have a certain dignity, yeah, and it's unconditional, yeah.
Yes, it's quite amazing. And trying to bring this conversation, because as Catholics, it should become as natural to us to do unto others as you would have them do unto us, you know, to love one another as Christ loves us. But in this world that doesn't see or doesn't understand what the transcendental after our death, that we're created for greatness, to try and give them this message, to try and capture their heart and their imagination, that these doors at the beginning of life and the end of life are important, is very, very, very challenging, and it requires a leadership unlike anything that we've seen in previous centuries. I mean, how do we tackle this as leaders in our respective fields to draw people's imagination and will and conscience and intellect to understand the greatness of caring for somebody that's dying without reward to us?
Well, by showing them, such as I try to do in this book, yeah, that it is worthwhile, yeah. You know,
Yeah.
there's I don't know, it's as if I don't know, you've got children too. So you know that when you go to the sea and you think it's ice cold, but the children swim in there and then they say, Papi, come in, yeah. And you think, oh God, I don't want to. But, you know, once you're in it, yeah, it's cold
Yes.
for a second. But once you're in it, you suddenly notice it's quite nice, actually, yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's a small sacrifice for a huge reward. Yeah. And I
Yes.
think the same goes for, it's a small, but still it's a sacrifice. Yeah. I don't want to
Yes.
make it more nice as it is. It is not. Yeah.
Yeah.
But so once you jump over this step, yeah, then it's like if the orchestra changes tune, suddenly you are tuned into something, yeah, and then you don't have to do so much, rather than relish what is happening, yeah. I think
Yes.
we are made for, and you can argue this on many different layers, even neuropsychologically, we are made for relations, we are made for dialogue, we are not made for ourselves, yeah. So
No.
that's what our body is telling us. We don't need to read a book. The whole structure of us, yeah, and the whole
Yeah.
nature actually of us, yeah, it's on dialogue. And once we enter into a dialogue with somebody who seems to be unable to, yeah, we see that it's only seemingly unable to, yeah. And yeah, I sometimes, I mean, I see the harshness of our times as well, yeah. But I'm in the meanwhile, I'm not so sure whether we should transport this on a rational, on an intellectual level, because it would become close to preaching, when people usually
Yeah.
shut their ears, understandably so perhaps. But when they have a taste of it, yeah. And how do they get a taste? Perhaps if those who sometimes caught a glimpse of this dialogue, yeah, transport it into public life. In other words, if we encounter somebody else and he or she may be very harsh, and I've got a few
Yeah.
colleagues who are hardcore materialists, and I, to some degree, I think they are in grave error when it comes to ontological matters, yeah.
Yeah.
But they're still humans also, yeah, and they also have certain needs and wants and certain hopes, yeah. Maybe they phrase them in a different language, yeah, and they encounter only the beauty of creation rather than of a idea behind this, an intention behind this, or even somebody having this intention, yeah. But still, they are capturing something of it, yeah. And
Yeah.
and I do believe that no, I don't believe it, but I have learned that the language of experience is the most convincing one. Yeah. So
Yes.
that's somehow push ourselves over the little sacrifice, jump into the sea. But once there, it becomes normal. And yeah, and I'm also sure that I'm wrong on many issues, theoretically speaking, philosophy, but still there's the act of mercy is not something which we know by
Yes.
intellectually know. Maybe we experience it if you meet somebody who's really very warm and you see, anyway, we know, yeah, but it's not something we should, I don't know, talk too much about. Yeah,
Yeah.
I talk a lot about it because because I only want to get the word get out. Yeah,
Yes,
there is
I
such a
understand.
thing, such as mercy. But then once you threw it out, then let it work by itself. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
and if we are going into the finer structure of where it comes from, not from us, yeah. So
Yeah.
it's, we are
Yeah.
gifted with it, and therefore we can spread it, yeah, like a candle lighting other candles, yeah, but never, yeah, anyway.
Yeah, and you're so right. How do we explain something that has to be experienced, and bringing people into that experience, requires a lot of authenticity on our side, but a lot
Mm.
of a profound meditation in a way of these realities, because once you've received all of these testimonies, and
Mm.
to knit them all together, when we're able to experience what is happening here, that person that is comatose, that person that is dying, that person that hasn't spoken to you or recognized you for maybe months or years,
Yes.
has value, that they're
Right.
able to come back and quote a poem. That value has to be that beauty has to be recognized. Imagine if we were never able to hear that poem, that we offered them
Yeah.
an injection, and we weren't able to witness that and
Right.
write about it and publish it. The world would be losing a treasure here. And
That
I
is
think
very true.
it's really horrific, when you think
Mm.
about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Did you manage to meet Viktor Franklin when he was in his later
Yes,
years?
I mean, yeah, I mean, the thing is, when
I'd
I
be
was
dying to ask you this. I'd be
no,
dying to
no,
ask.
but I think it's a very free floating, and thank you for that. Actually, it's quite nice conversation. Um, yeah, I came to Vienna to study here. First of all, art history, which I failed enormously in, but then thankfully I went to the psychology and philosophy department, and us students, they were circulating like these tapes, yeah. So I'm
Yeah.
not that young, so there were tapes, and with lectures of Adorno and the Dalai Lama and Fromm and also Viktor Frankl, yeah. And one of them was called Youth and the Search for Meaning, so the young
Yes.
person in search for meaning, and it was having these questions which to a young soul are burning on. Now I'm a bit older, I know they're still burning. Namely the question, how do I live not only so that I feel good, but that I'm good, that I know what I'm good for? Yeah, why am I
Yes.
here? Yeah, and of course, if you're a student, once again, not only then, but also, especially if you're a student, if you navigate your place in the world, it's a very burning question. And then also, how do I make use of my talents, and how do I deal with my weaknesses, plenty of them, in such a way that they don't hurt me or others or the world or life and so on. Yeah. And all of these, frankly, squeezed into 90 very powerful minutes. And I knew this will have an impact on my life. And that was right. Yeah. And so, and one day a cousin of mine, also a philosopher, psychology philosopher, told me, or student of that, told me, but this Viktor Frankl still is, you find so great, still is alive. And not only that, even though he's 90 years old, he's still teaching at Vienna University, medical school. Yeah. So off I went and listened to his last two lectures, which were enormous. Yeah, Frankl was nearly blind. He had a macular degeneration, and yet, and you know what? On many different layers, he was. I mean, if you know Schnitzler or Grillparz, a very Austrian Stefan Zweig, yeah. So he was in a certain way the incarnation of the Jewish elderly, gentleman, being a Holocaust survivor, but in a way a child of a century long gone. Yeah, he grew up in a
Yeah.
monarchy, just imagine. Yeah, and
Wow.
he listened to Freud anyway, and Adler and Freud and all these. Max Scheler, of course, was a very important person. Scheler was the one who brought him towards the personalist turn. Yeah, and um, and after I listened to these last lectures, I wrote a letter to him saying, I'm just a nobody, just a student, and not a very good one. I was doing everything but studying, but still, and one day I didn't receive a letter as a reply, but I received a phone call. About a week later, his wife called me and said, Viktor Frankl, thanks you for your beautiful letter. And just to tell you, if you go across our building, the house, there's an optician, they always take glasses, yeah, and go there and say, Professor Frankl sent me, just a sentence, yeah. And of course, very same afternoon, I went to the store and said, Professor Frankl sent me, and the shopkeeper said, wait a moment, and he pulled under his table, he put 3 or 4 books, yeah, which were in Frankl dedicated, yeah. And it was not one dedication. It went over like part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, over 4 books, yeah, and was an encouragement to continue on this way, on this path, yeah, which I indeed did, yeah. So
Yeah.
that's how I met, so to speak, Frankl, yeah. And then later on, I was, I his personal estate. There were many letters. There were many important witness accounts also from the Holocaust and so on. Yeah, and letters from people who have been Theresienstadt and Dachau and Auschwitz with Frankl. So, but also the whole span of the history of the past, the history of ideas of psychiatry of the last century. Frankl lived from 1905 to 1997,
Yes.
which was the time, so to speak, of the development of psychiatry, psychology, psychotherapy, yeah, and he knew them all. I mean, he was Kübler-Ross, Scheler, Jaspers, Heidegger, Binswanger, even Pope Paul VI invited Frankl. Just imagine, Frankl. He invited Frankl to come to the Vatican when he heard that he was in Rome. Yeah, and there was a beautiful. audience with, Frankl's first wife was murdered in Bergen-Belsen. His second wife was Catholic, but Frankl was Jewish. And Paul VI invited Frankl to come, yeah, and they were there and you have to speak, back then at least in the Vatican state, you have to speak Latin. It's the official language. So they had this with a translator, but at the end of the audience, the Pope was already going, to his private palace rooms. The Pope lost his patience, turned around, and we know this, yeah, and almost loudly talked to Frankl, bitte beten Sie für mich, please pray for me. Yeah, and Frankl
Wow.
always was very moved. I mean, that the Pope turns to the Jewish psychiatrist, Holocaust survivors, please pray for me. Yeah, totally outside of the protocol in German. Yeah, and and so on. Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
we never hear of these stories, these
Yeah.
because I mean, I read Viktor Frankl in Rome in the 1990s, and he
Mm-hmm.
had a profound impact on me because I was working in Poland, and it
Yeah.
was just the experience, his experience of the horror. We read of the different saints like Edith Stein.
Mm.
You read her writings and her experience, and how could this incredible intellect, this Carmelite with such
Mm.
an intellect, how could she face this? And we hear this experience, and today in 2024, we see a generation of young people that are yearning for something, but are not looking at the experience of
Mm.
what you've seen, your work of Viktor Franklin's and so many other people
Mm.
that are trying to teach us. We are drowning them out with materialism and a culture
Yeah.
of I mean, celebrating abortion. I mean, people are
Mm.
putting their energy and their time into destroying the child in the room instead of understanding
Mm.
there's so much more depth to your
Mm.
to what you see if you can
Mm.
go beyond the if you can meditate on it. I mean,
Right. Yeah.
there's an author I think both of us appreciate, which would be the Russian author Valentin Tomberg, and he also lived through the First World War, saw his mother being beaten to death, going through the different thought systems, theosophical, and so, and arriving to Catholicism through a deep process of meditation, of
Mm.
understanding the truths. And I think a friend of mine, Roger Buck, who
Mm.
became Catholic because of his work. I mean, these men like Viktor Franklin speak to us today on to go deeper, to really
Yes.
go deeper.
Mm.
And I applaud your capacity to actually drag us deeper than what you're just seeing. You're seeing a person to dementia. Can you go
Mm.
deeper to what you're seeing in front of you? It's so important.
Yeah, I mean, so many keywords. You mentioned Edith Stein. I don't know. Okay, let's have a bucket. Let's see how long this talk is going to be and how long the listeners, the viewers, are going to endure us. But you mentioned Edith Stein, and there's just a footnote which few people know. Edith Stein didn't know what to do with her life. And this
Yes.
is not apocryphal. It's we know this, yeah. And there used to be somebody in Vienna who unfortunately is mostly forgotten, Rudolf Allers. He was a student of Alfred Adler, then
Yeah.
also read Max Scheler, and Max Scheler, of
Yeah.
course, also was a high influence on John Paul II. And uh, and Rudolf Allers converted to Catholicism. And in his household, there came Edith Stein, and she, I think, wanted to study theater. And he, I think, please check it, but I think that's the story. And he said, earthly theater, what for and for how long? Yeah.
Yes.
But look at the cosmic drama and then study theology. And then she called, I mean, he was the megaphone, but she heard her vocation through this megaphone being Rudolf Allers. Yeah. And, but Allers was also a teacher and friend of Hans Urs von Balthasar. the Thomberg connection, but also Viktor Frankl, yeah, because Frankl was an Adlerian, like a student of Alfred Adler, yeah, and this comes closer to who we are, but still is a bit reductionist, yeah, because it reduces us on being only in relation to others, but not also a whole individual, yeah, at least potentially whole when we are healed, yeah, and so and so these names, so to speak, are if it's on a piano, it's on one scale, yeah. There are different tones, but they're on one scale, yeah. Ahlers, Edelstein, Thomberg in a in a bit further away, and Viktor Frankl, yeah. So these I just wanted to mention because you mentioned, when it comes to our current generation, I've got two teenage daughters. I know TikTok and all these,
Yeah.
yeah, and these are toys, which is beautiful as toys, yeah. But usually we don't take a toy car to travel, and that's a problem when it overtakes everyday life, yeah.
Yeah.
And then, but it's the harshness, the enormous mercilessness, the lack of compassion which we see in our times, which is, yeah, it's sad, yeah. But it's sad. But if I talk to my parents or used to talk to my grandparents, they tell us that every generation thinks that this one is I don't know whether there's an involution, but there's also a certain kind of counter movement, and I believe, and I have the sense that it's getting stronger once again. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
um and our work, I mean, just a drop in the in a huge wave of trying to somehow counter, to reawaken our humaneness, yeah, which
Yes.
is so important. And you mentioned the church or being Catholic. Yeah, I
Yeah.
often wonder, and one of the intentions of this meeting I mentioned earlier on, 2 years ago, we presented our findings to the Holy Father, is how do we convey this? And once again, preaching will carry us only so and so far, yeah, and
Yeah.
discussing on the structure of the church is, I think, the least interesting point. Like we have this synodal way in Germany and so on, in Austria also. But to go full blown into the mystery without, we will never understand the mystery. Yeah. Therefore, why not expose? Yeah. I often think, I believe, and I, for a long, many years, tried to understand the Eucharist. And by now I know, forget it, you will never understand it, but you can relish it. Yeah. And
Yes.
and if you put the mystical, the ununderstandable side of the church, yeah, of yeah, of it, and expose the world to it, then I think many will be attracted, yeah, not
Yes.
by the words,
Yes.
but by the
Yeah.
facts, yeah.
Yes. Yes. I mean, that's on a side note, when I in 2019, when somebody says read Tomberg, and I had no idea. And and then I was introduced to this, oh, I read that book and I became Catholic. And I found this whole world of Catholics around the world that have been brought into the mystery. It's exactly what you're saying, to the mystery of Christ, to the glory of encountering the person of Christ, to going beyond and encountering the mystery in his sacraments, in his church, in everything. And I'm saying this, I never thought it would be possible. And then I met the author who's published many books, Roger Buck, who came from the New Age movement into the Catholic Church,
Uh-huh.
and has written various books. And it's this is for our age. This is what people are yearning for. They're not yearning for us to preach.
Hmm.
Show us.
Yeah.
Show us, take us into the mystery. But the only way we can do that is we need to reflect. We need to be reflections of the mystery in ourselves, and
Hmm.
to don't follow me, go there.
Yeah, yeah.
It's truly amazing. It's an amazing project
Right.
that all of these
Yeah, yeah.
And my daughter is going to love this video. My daughter is studying philosophy. She's in Queens in
Ah, yeah.
Belfast, and so she'll find it interesting.
Good.
Maybe if you need a researcher for a summer, you can ask her to help.
Good.
But where do you think you will build after this book? What do you see as the next part of the project of what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, now I want to look into an aspect which I briefly touch upon in the book, namely, what do people talk about when they have a terminal lucid episode? Once again, just to reiterate, these are people who have been gone for years, sometimes 2 years, and they haven't been very communicative because if they tried to capture something in the memory, they were in a vacuum, so to speak. There wasn't much to get out of it. Yeah. And that's very difficult, of course, to communicate. If you lose touch to your existence in time with your biography and so on, it's very hard to find something to connect to the world. But what are they talking about? And what I find so astonishing, there's a similar phenomenon called paradoxical lucidity, which is terminal lucidity, but without the person going to die. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's not that often. It's much lower in the prevalence, but it does happen. But we now know, at least I think my database in this case load is growing almost by week. Yeah, people very often not only have access to the memory, but they also seem to know that they're going to die.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is very unusual, and because we all know we are going to die, but they know that they're going to die within the next few days. Yeah, and or maybe hours. So something must be there, some connection must be there. Yeah. And I'd like to know more about this. And then there's a lower proportion of cases in which patients, this is going to sound spooky now, but it does happen. What can I do? Yeah. And Peter Fenwick in England also does, a psychiatrist, does a lot of studies on this. Mm, there's this, what is called visitation experiences. In other words, people who are, let me tell you, I have one case in Switzerland. It's an elderly lady, and she had two children. And both of them died. Yeah, I think on Christmas Eve because they wanted to visit her in the nursing home. Yeah, she was by then she was demented, but still had some access to. Yeah, it was early stage, and they had a car accident and they died. Yeah, so and she had the picture of her, as most lovely mothers do have, pictures of her children by her bedside. Yeah, and so these were gone, they were dead. Yeah, and in the beginning she mourned very often because she forgot that they had died, as dementia sometimes goes. Yeah, but as the disease progressed, she had no idea who these are, and as sometimes happens, she couldn't care less actually. So the picture was there. Yeah, so and one day, in other words, she had advanced Alzheimer's, but one day the nurse came and opened the window, and suddenly she hears, and this patient had been mute for half a year or so. Suddenly hears the words, "Thank you very much." And the nurse was a bit shocked and turned around and saw that this patient who was gone, yeah, looked at her and thanked her for a simple deed like opening a window. Speaking of mercy, it occurs in many different. Anyway, and then she said, Krista and Peter, her children, yeah, are here.
Wow.
And they came to finally I can go. Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. In the same afternoon she died. Yeah. So and there are many, yeah, I mean, there are at least some of such cases. Yeah. And I want to look into them because they might tell us something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they tell us something, definitely. What they tell us, I don't know, but we have to look into this. Yeah. And I love music and I tell the story in the book, but there's a related experience, or at least Sergei Rachmaninoff, the great Russian composer, when he died in Beverly Hills because many of these people had to leave because of Stalin, Russia, if they could. And when Rachmaninoff moved into his last house in Beverly Hills, he was clairvoyant, or at least sensitive or clairvoyant, and he almost on inspiration said, "This is going to be my last home on earth. This is where I'm going to die. Yeah. So only a few years later, he was on a concert tour and became gravely ill. What people thought it might be pneumonia, but it was lung cancer. Yeah. So, and he had to be brought back to his home in Beverly Hills, and there he lay on his deathbed. His wife, assistants, and so on surrounding him. It was very, very silent. And it seemed to be a beautiful, well, yeah, you can say this, a beautiful, breathing became slower, everything was very peaceful, heartbeat becomes irregular. And now was the time to die. But suddenly, unexpectedly, and with that, many unexpected things happen, usually, he opened his eyes again and looked positively, enthusiastic and elated and said, "Can you hear the music?" And the others heard nothing. And he looked and said, "No, there is no music." And he says, "Yes, but can't you hear how beautiful the music is?" Yeah. And they insisted, "No, there is no music." Yeah. So Rachmaninoff then finally said, "Okay, so then the music is only in my head." And he lay down and died. Yeah. So beautiful, but it could have been a bit more beautiful, because why did these people insist that there is no music rather than asking him, "What are you hearing?" Yeah. One of the greatest Russian composers. I mean, Prokofiev, Rachmaninoff, these are really the greatest one. What is this music? Whistle it so we can, record it or at least share it. Yeah. And this is something I would like to do, namely ask, what are you, what is there? And it's not a huge number, but I've got a few, let's say a few dozen cases in which something like that happens. Like, somebody being there, others don't see, and so on. And I do have a visiting professorship in Moscow. It's currently on rest because of the political circumstances. It's very difficult. Yeah, anyway, but I hope it will one day be possible once again. And there's a hospice affiliated to the University Institute. And one of these nurses told me what she does. Yeah. Namely, when people talk about visitors or things others don't see, yeah, she doesn't say, "No, there's nobody there." She says, "I see things you don't see these days." And that's very fine. But would you like to tell me? Would you be the translator? Is there something they would like me to do? And so on. Would you like to share this? And this question, would you like to share this? I would like to dedicate my next book to this. I mean, yeah, one book I just write on psychology, but the next book in this area is going to be on this topic. Yeah. So on this occurrences, which are, yeah.
It's incredible. And if people want to share their experiences to actually collate these experiences, where can they email them to them? Is there a research team to help you?
The research team, I'm sure I'm going to get a few enthusiastic students, yeah, but they don't need to be too enthusiastic. You also need to do, that's the inner fight, the two souls, good, yeah. On the one hand, when you are in this field, yeah, you want to dive head through, but at the same time, you have to do proper academic research, yeah. And so I try to, also in the book, it's a very fine balance, and I hope sometimes at least I was able to keep it. You want to cover both, but yes, I don't have a website in the sense of, I do have a website which is very boring, namely on my scientific journals and articles, but I'm fairly easy to find on the internet. If you just, yeah, and it's even easier. It's my first name, alexander.batthyány@gmail.com. So that's the universal email address for everyone, I think. And I'll be happy to receive. And I should say, it takes a bit longer than I planned to, but I will respond to everyone. And I promised this to myself and to my readers a long, long time ago. I will respond, and not only like a formal "thank you very much, goodbye," but I will try to relish and acknowledge. Once again, we are beings of dialogue, yeah. Yes. But sometimes you've got so many dialogues at once because my mailbox is overflowing, so it takes a long, long, long time. But even if you wait half a year, you will receive, if I'm alive and I'm here, you will receive my response. Yeah. And I try to relish and acknowledge this. Yeah.
That is a really amazing. And I see Peter Kreft has endorsed your book. Have you met him?
No, no, I must say I adore his work, yeah. And I don't know whose idea it was, but the publisher,
Oh,
being PR, said who should we market this to? Yeah. Now, if you look at the publisher, St. Martin's Essentials, they
yeah,
do have, Osho, who was a very dubious Indian cult leader whose people poisoned the whole city in Oregon, yeah, and so on. And they wanted to market it mainly to the so-called New Age market, because this seems to be where near-death experience, which I also cover in the book and so on, go. And I said, okay, you can do that because it won't hurt to see, I quote Balthasar, Henri de Lubac, and and
yeah,
Pombeck and so on. And but also please don't forget that there are other people like Peter Kraft and so on. And so they
yeah.
they sent it to him as well. And he wrote a very nice endorsement. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Because I do think we're in this moment in history, especially in church, where and Bishop Barron and others are doing this,
Mm,
where we're taking the time to actually study the man. I mean, and Peterson
mm,
is doing this, and you see this Russell Brand. It's across the world where we're spiritual beings. We
mm,
are spiritual, so we need to do the study on this and how we interact and what is happening in us. And I think you're at the forefront of this and pushing this conversation out to the world now as a doctor, because you're able to bring in
mm.
Frankl and so many others. I mean, Kubler-Ross. I work in business world, and we use her change. Her
Ah, yeah,
change all the time
really?
for in projects. Yeah, if every time I'm doing a project, I bring up Kubler-Ross. Okay, so you're going
Right.
to go through a change. How does change work? Well,
Yeah.
you fight it, and then you're angry, and then you move to acceptance all the time. And we're human beings. And she was she was able to take something,
Mm,
recognize it, and say, this is the way you are, this is the way we'll always be. You get a diagnosis of cancer, you're going to go through this. You get
interesting.
you
Mm.
lose your job, you're going to go through this. I lost my job, I'm fighting, I'm hating it, until you move to the acceptance, and then you move to the new. And
Yeah, yeah.
you bring this, I use it in my project world, in my business world, and I bring it into a team. We're going through a change. So this is what you're all going to experience. Deal with it. And and I put their minds into a state so that when the confusion comes, says, well, you're here on this, but just wait a while. We'll be up here. And it
Mm.
usually works very well on my projects. It really does, because I can understand where I am on
Yeah, funny.
my business world. And but also, all of these things that these that they teach us, we have to mentor and disciple a new world, our children, to
Mm.
see and understand it. And that's why I'm
Yeah.
fascinated
May
with
I
it.
just chime in here? Um, you mentioned a few like Peters and so on, there's only one. Thank you for putting me at the forefront of such a, but I would rather, I'm happy with the second or third or last row, at least to do some contribution. But where I try to refrain, to keep out of, is what I sense is culture, is something like a
Yeah,
cultural war, if you want.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Um, I see the aggression on both sides, and I
yeah,
see also the seduction to become aggressive and to on purpose misunderstand each other and so on. Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
and look, I also see some of the extremes of what now called as wokeness and so on. And on the other hand, yeah, I also and maybe that's a personal thing. I mean, yeah, I also see the good intentions, yeah, on people who otherwise we might not be in the same boat, but I see where they're heading, and they're seeing the same sun, even if they take very
yeah,
different trajectories, and and I know how seductive it is if you go on YouTube or these whatever Twitter and so on, and you see these compilations of confrontations and so on. But we are feeding the appetite of aggression. Yeah, we are
yes,
feeding a war. Yeah, where we all need urgently definitely not more war. I mean, look at the past century. What louder and larger lessons do we need? I mean, where will it go? Yeah, and so uh, yeah,
Tomberg speaks exactly what you're saying.
Mhm.
He says the exact same thing, because we you know we look at what happened in the last century.
And yeah, so that's why I feel I'm quite happy to stay out of that. Yeah, not because I don't have an opinion, but I don't take my opinion so seriously. Yeah, because my opinion is just a thought. My but we talked about mercy and so on. I mean, at least an attempt to cultivate it. Yeah, but there's a different layer where metaphysical things happen, namely here and now. Yeah, and these culture wars take place there and then on the internet and in certain forums and so on. So just it's just a footnote. I don't see myself to be part of such a movement, and I insist on not being it. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I hope that the little I can contribute will be useful to all sides.
Yes.
You see,
Yes.
but because it's before the junction, it's so to speak, it's us, it's our
Yeah.
humaneness and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, it's and you really did such a good job in the book. I listened to it on audiobook,
Mhm.
and it was great listening to the reader, and he did a great job of
He did
actually.
enormous. I must say. I mean, I love music, yeah, and of course, therefore, when I'm listening to audiobooks, I'm critical. But this was so. I'm sorry, I'm not making an advertisement. I'm just putting out my gratitude. The reading was so beautiful, yeah,
Yeah,
much better than my writing in a way because
yeah.
it gave it. It's like seeing the scale and then seeing it sung. Very nice. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm slightly dyslexic, so I struggle
Ah,
to get through the reading of a text, but
right.
I'm very good at or I read very slowly. I have to
Mm.
meditate on, but the audiobook helped me a lot. So, and I just wanted to thank you so much for taking your time for bringing us deeper into this conversation. And as I said, and I do encourage people to go and get the book. It's called Threshold, Terminal Lucidity, and the Border of Life and Death. And it's a beautiful book to meditate on and to see how this conversation can go out into a secular world
Mm.
and as I said, I think you're giving a beautiful contribution, building on the thought of so many other philosophers and doctors in the field.
Thank you very, very much for having me, and all the best to listeners and viewers.
Yeah, thank you. And if you're
Thank
ever in
you.
Ireland, please come and visit us.
And if you're ever in Vienna, please visit us. Yeah.
I will do. The last time I went to Vienna was Archduke Michael that kept me there, and he brought me to Budapest.
Yeah,
Uh, so I was privileged to visit nice parts of both countries.
of
But
course. Vienna and Budapest are like sibling. I mean, yeah, very nice.
yeah, yeah.
Good. Okay.
God
All the
bless.
best.
Thank
God
you.
bless. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.